Her voice was barely a whisper, shaky, almost pleading, but I remember it cutting through the cabin noise like a knife through silk. The hum of the engines, the chatter of passengers, the scent of jet fuel and cheap coffee, all of it blurred for one suspended moment. I looked up, confused, half expecting her to smile and say she was joking. But she didn't. Her eyes were wide, glistening, the kind of eyes that know something you don't. "Ma'am?" I asked, half nervous, half offended. She just shook her head, straightened her collar, and walked away down the aisle like nothing had happened. That was the first time I felt the weight of silence in a crowded plane. I didn't get off the flight that day, and sometimes, late at night, I still wonder what would have happened if I had. But that moment, that whisper, it wasn't about danger in the air. It was about something else entirely. Something waiting for me when I landed. Back then, my life was what people call stable. Married 23 years, a husband who was predictable in the best and worst ways. One grown daughter who had just moved out, leaving behind the faint smell of her lavender perfume in her old bedroom. I was 51, still working part-time as a school administrator. My days started early, the sound of the coffee maker dripping, the morning news murmuring from the kitchen TV, my husband Tom, reading the sports section like the world beyond those printed pages didn't exist. We weren't unhappy, not exactly. We were settled, like furniture that had stopped being rearranged a long time ago. Our conversations had shrunk into routines. Did you pay the water bill? What's for dinner? How's the traffic? I used to miss the way we used to talk about dreams, plans, even stupid little things that didn't matter. But over the years, comfort had quietly turned into distance. Still, I told myself, that's marriage. People change. Love grows quieter. The flight that day was supposed to be simple. A weekend visit to see my sister in Colorado. Tom couldn't come. He had a work commitment. That was his phrase for anything that didn't involve me. He'd kissed my cheek that morning, absent-mindedly, like someone signing off on a receipt. "Text me when you land," he said. I remember laughing softly. You never even check your phone. He smiled, a thin, polite smile, and walked out the door. The plane boarded smoothly. I'd chosen a window seat because I've always liked watching the ground shrink beneath the clouds, a small reminder that the world is bigger than my problems. The woman next to me was talkative, showing me pictures of her grandchildren on her phone. I smiled and nodded, pretending interest, but my mind kept drifting. To Tom, to our daughter, to the uneasy feeling I couldn't name. And then came that whisper, that strange, trembling whisper from a flight attendant who couldn't meet my eyes. "Get off before it's too late." For the rest of the flight, her words replayed in my head. What did she mean? Too late for what? Was something wrong with the plane? But we landed safely. Everyone clapped. That silly, comforting applause people give for making it to the ground in one piece. I told myself she must have mistaken me for someone else. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, like I'd stepped into a different version of my life without realizing it. When I arrived at my sister's house, the Colorado air was sharp and cold, full of pine and memory. She hugged me tightly, the way only sisters do, long enough to make you forget what's bothering you, if just for a second. We spent the weekend cooking, reminiscing, and laughing about old times. I didn't mention the flight attendant. It felt too strange to say aloud. But on the last night, as I sat by her fireplace scrolling through my phone, something small but wrong caught my eye. Tom hadn't texted once. Not even a "did you land okay?" That wasn't unusual. He was careless with small things. But then I noticed something else, a photo notification. It was from our shared family cloud, the one we used for pictures and household stuff. It was a photo I hadn't taken. Tom was in it, standing in our kitchen, holding a wine glass. And next to him, a woman I didn't recognize, younger, smiling, too comfortable in my kitchen. My throat went dry. I told myself it must be an old friend, maybe a colleague. But the timestamp said otherwise. Taken just 2 hours after I'd left for the airport. I stared at that picture for a long time, the screen lighting my face in the dark living room. Something in my chest tightened. not quite pain, not yet, just disbelief. I zoomed in. His hand wasn't just near hers, it was on hers. And that's when the flight attendant's voice came back. Softer now but clearer than ever. Get off before it's too late. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything. Tom's distant goodbye, the whisper, the photo. My sister noticed my silence over breakfast. "You look pale," she said. "Everything okay?" I smiled the way women do when they're falling apart but don't want anyone to see. "Yeah," I said quietly, "just tired from the flight." Inside, though, something had started to crack open. A truth I wasn't ready to face but couldn't ignore. The flight attendant's words weren't about the plane. They were a warning about my life. The morning sun filtered through the pine trees outside my sister's window, sharp and cold, but I couldn't see it. My mind was tangled in the image of Tom with her, whoever she was, in my kitchen, smiling like it was nothing. I tried to focus on breakfast. The smell of eggs and sizzling bacon usually grounded me, but I couldn't taste it. The coffee was bitter in my mouth, though I hadn't added sugar. My sister chatted about her garden, the upcoming town fair, even the neighbor's dog that had escaped last week. I nodded absently, laughing when appropriate, but it was mechanical. After breakfast, I excused myself and went to the guest room to lie down. I needed quiet. Needed to sort through the knot of disbelief and shame twisting in my stomach. And then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tom. Short, normal, innocent, almost too innocent. Got home safely. See you Sunday. I stared at it. Nothing in it hinted at guilt. Nothing to explain the photo. My chest tightened. The more I tried to rationalize it, maybe it was a mistake, maybe someone else's picture, the less it made sense. I put the phone down and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the quilt. That's when I realized something else. Something I had ignored for months. Tom had been different. It wasn't sudden, not like a switch flipping overnight. It was subtle. A laugh that didn't reach his eyes, a brush off when I mentioned plans, a phone habit that suddenly felt secretive. I remembered the little things, the late meetings, the mysterious weekend trips he never explained, the way he'd shift in his seat whenever I asked where he was going. I had told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things, that our life had simply become routine, and I was looking for excitement where none existed. But now, seeing that photo, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I spent the rest of the morning walking through my sister's house like a ghost. The smell of cinnamon from the freshly baked bread did nothing to comfort me. I went from room to room, running my fingers over familiar furniture, trying to convince myself that maybe this was all a misunderstanding. When I called Tom later, he picked up immediately. His voice was warm, casual. "Hey, honey, how was the flight?" "Fine," I said. My voice sounded brittle, unfamiliar. "Listen, I saw something today. A photo, in the family cloud. You were with someone, at home, while I was gone." There was a pause on the other end, a pause that told me more than any words could. "Oh, that," he said finally. His tone was careful, measured. "It's nothing, just a friend." "From work?" "She came over for dinner. You know, casual." "While I was on my way to the airport?" My voice rose slightly, though I tried to keep it even. "Tom, she's in our kitchen, laughing with you. Your hand, I don't know." He laughed lightly, too easily. "You worry too much. It's innocent. Trust me." And in that laugh, in that casual dismissal, I felt the first real crack of betrayal. Over the next few days, I tried to observe, to watch him without being obvious. The flight home was tense, my mind replaying every detail. The flight attendant's words echoed with increasing clarity. "Get off before it's too late." I wondered, sometimes bitterly, if she had known what awaited me. Had she seen it in his eyes, or in the way he moved? Or was it simply a premonition, a sense that my life was about to shift irrevocably? At home, the atmosphere was deceptively normal. The house smelled of pine-scented candles I'd bought last month. The clocks ticked steadily. Tom went about his routine as if nothing had happened. But I was watching, and slowly, over small, almost imperceptible signs, I began to notice things. The missing receipts, the unexplained charges on our joint account, a lipstick stain on his collar, The way his phone vibrated and he quickly hid it. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe I was paranoid. But deep down, a seed of dread had been planted, and it was growing. One evening I confronted him gently, the way I always tried first. "Tom," I said quietly, leaning against the doorway while he washed the dinner dishes, "can we talk?" He didn't look up immediately. There was that pause again, the one that had always made my stomach twist. "About what?" he asked casually. "The other night, the photo, your guest." "I need honesty, Tom." He straightened, turning to face me. "I told you it's nothing. Why are you making a big deal?" I could see it in his eyes, the flicker of guilt quickly masked by irritation. I swallowed my frustration. "It's a big deal to me," I said, "because I can't ignore it, and I can't ignore the feeling that something's changed." He sighed and shook his head. "You're imagining things, as usual," but I knew I wasn't. That whisper from the plane, the quiet warning, had been real, and for the first time I realized ignoring it could cost me everything. That night I lay awake, listening to the soft hum of the ceiling fan. The smell of vanilla from the candle on the nightstand filled the room, but it didn't comfort me. I felt hollowed out from suspicion, from betrayal, from the slow, gnawing realization that my life had quietly shifted while I had been distracted. I thought about the flight attendant again, about how calm her whisper had been, how urgent, and I understood some warnings come too late, but some come just in time, if you pay attention. I needed proof, not assumptions, not feelings, proof. Because once you see what someone is willing to hide behind a smile, ignoring it doesn't just risk heartbreak, it risks losing yourself. And I wasn't ready to lose myself. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photo again, Tom smiling, her hand on his. The familiarity of our kitchen turned alien. The hum of the ceiling fan above was no longer comforting. It was the soundtrack to my unraveling. The next morning, I told myself, today I will know the truth. I started small, pretending casualness. I asked about his day, about errands, about anything that could give me a glimpse into his patterns. He answered, but I could hear the slight hesitation behind his words, the micro pauses that don't escape a careful listener. I smelled his cologne lingering in the hall, the one he always wears, and I wondered if it now carried someone else's perfume. By mid-afternoon, my patience ran out. I decided to check the shared family cloud, the one where the incriminating photo had appeared. I had avoided it since the first shock, but I needed more. Scrolling through the past weeks, my stomach tightened with every seemingly innocuous snapshot. Dinners, errands, walks in the park. Then I found it, a string of photos I hadn't seen. Dates, times, details that didn't match our life. Tom and her, always smiling like it was innocent. But the way he touched her, the way she leaned into him, the way he laughed at things I had never been part of, told me otherwise. The betrayal wasn't just in the photos. It was in the small, deliberate acts he thought I wouldn't notice. The dinner I thought was work-related. It wasn't. The weekend he claimed to be golfing, it was with her. My husband had carved out a secret life, one I had never been allowed into. I sat there, phone trembling in my hands. The air in the room felt heavy, thick, almost suffocating. My sister knocked on the door lightly. "Everything okay?" she asked. I shook my head, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "Yes, just paperwork." But inside I was breaking, not with anger first, not with screams, but with this deep, quiet ache, the ache of realizing that someone you trust completely can live a lie so comfortably. The confrontation was inevitable. I waited until the evening, when Tom came home from what he claimed was a late meeting. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house. He hummed, relaxed, like he always did, like nothing had changed. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands gripping the edge so hard my knuckles whitened. He looked up. "You okay?" he asked, smiling lazily. I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. "No, Tom, I'm not okay. I saw the photos, all of them. I know about her." For a moment he froze. The carefree mask slipped just for a second, and in that second I saw it. Guilt, panic, the truth he had hidden so carefully, now glaring back at him. "It's not what you think," he said quickly, a little too quickly. "Oh? Because it looks exactly like what I think," I replied, voice tight. "You've been seeing her for months, haven't you? Right in our home, while I trusted you, while I planned a life we shared?" He swallowed. I didn't mean for you to find out this way." "And you think that makes it better?" I asked, my voice trembling now, not with fear but with the sting of betrayal. "Do you have any idea how it feels to see your husband, your partner, smiling like that? With someone else? In the kitchen I cooked in? On the couch we sat together? On the bed we shared?" His eyes darted away. He wanted to speak, to explain, to apologize, but no words came. I felt a strange calm then, a quiet authority that surprised even me. "You have two choices, Tom. 1, tell me everything now with honesty. 2, you leave. Tonight. And I never have to see you again." He laughed bitterly, almost in disbelief. "You really think it's that simple?" "It's simple for me," I said, "because I can't live in a house with lies. Not anymore. I can't ignore the whispers, the proofs, the little signs that screamed at me every day. That flight attendant. She wasn't wrong. I should have listened. Not to her, but to myself." He took a step toward me. "Please, it's not what you think." I held up my hand. "Stop. You've done enough thinking for both of us." Later that night, when he finally confessed about the affair, about the lies, about how long it had been going on, I felt a mix of emotions I didn't know I had: rage, grief, disbelief, and a strange, quiet relief. Relief because the unknown had finally been uncovered. Relief because I didn't have to guess anymore. But mostly, grief. Grief for the life I thought we had, for the trust shattered, for the quiet moments of love that were quietly replaced with deceit. I remember sitting at the edge of our bed after he left, running my fingers over the quilt he had slept under just hours before. The smell of his cologne lingered faintly, and I felt an absurd pang, like I was mourning someone who was still alive. The next days blurred together. I went through our shared accounts, sorted through receipts, and began blocking him from everything. Not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. I realized then that betrayal isn't loud. It doesn't always come with slamming doors or screaming matches. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, hidden in a smile, a photo, a whispered word, and it's the quiet kind that leaves the deepest scars. The morning after Tom left, the house felt like it had exhaled, a hollow, uncertain sort of quiet. I wandered from room to room, touching surfaces as if they could reassure me. The bedspread, still slightly warm from his departure, smelled faintly of his cologne. I pressed my cheek to it and closed my eyes, not to feel comfort but to remember how fragile trust could be. I realized then that I couldn't just sit and wait for life to return to normal, not when my sense of safety, my sense of home, had been stripped from me. So I began to plan, not for revenge, though a part of me imagined it fleetingly in sharp, delicious flashes, but for clarity, for control. I needed to know everything, to rebuild what had been broken, starting with the truth. I started small. The first step was his phone. I knew he would change passwords, delete messages, try to cover tracks, but I needed a baseline. I began taking notes on numbers, emails, and patterns I remembered. I reached out quietly to friends who might have seen him recently, casually, without arousing suspicion. Next, the family cloud. I downloaded everything, all photos, timestamps, metadata, and organized them chronologically. Every dinner, every late-night meeting, every work trip was documented. I was methodical, precise, letting the facts accumulate like a quiet storm. Even in these small actions, I felt strength returning. It wasn't the fiery kind that screams or burns. It was the patient, enduring kind that anchors you when the world is tilting. Then came the hardest part, deciding whether to confront the people involved. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to scream at her, the woman in the photos, to demand answers. But Auntie May always said, Some storms pass easier when you don't add wind to the fire. So I chose observation first. I watched their social media. Nothing obvious, but enough hints to confirm that they were seeing each other. I noted their routines, their interactions. My heart sank with each detail. But I reminded myself, I was doing this for myself, not out of spite. One evening, I received a message from her, the other woman. Casual, polite, almost friendly. "Hi, I know this is awkward, but can we meet? I think you deserve to hear everything from me." I stared at it for a long moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed a simple reply, when and where. Meeting her was surreal. She was younger, nervous, fumbling with her words. But there was honesty in her eyes. Raw, almost painful. She told me everything, how it started, what she felt, why she never tried to hide it once it became serious. She cried, not melodramatically, but quietly, a grief that mirrored mine. And in that moment I realized something profound. Betrayal often doesn't come from pure malice. People are messy, flawed. Sometimes they hurt others without realizing the weight of their actions. I left the meeting with a strange sense of clarity. The fog of confusion had lifted slightly, replaced by the knowledge that I had done everything I could to face the truth. And truth, no matter how painful, is a beginning, not an end. Back at home, I started setting boundaries. I called the bank to separate accounts. I changed passwords. I deleted shared files. Each action was deliberate, a reclamation of space that had felt invaded. I wasn't acting out of revenge, I was acting out of necessity. I also began to talk to friends, quietly, carefully, not to gossip but to rebuild a support system I had neglected while trying to maintain the illusion of a perfect life. I realized how isolating trust can be when it is broken, how heavy silence becomes when it carries unspoken truths. One afternoon I found myself in the kitchen, the same one where the betrayal had unfolded. I opened the window, letting in sunlight and the smell of rain-soaked grass. I cleaned, slowly, methodically, scrubbing away the invisible residue of deceit. It felt symbolic, a small ritual of reclaiming my life. I understood then that the reaction to betrayal isn't always dramatic. It isn't fireworks or screams. Sometimes it's quiet, calculated, patient, like planting seeds in soil, knowing they will grow stronger over time. I also started journaling, not for proof or for vindication, but to process, to anchor myself. Writing allowed me to speak the truths I couldn't say aloud, to release the anger, fear, and sorrow without letting them fester. In these pages I revisited every memory, our first kiss, our wedding day, the little morning routines I had taken for granted. And I wept, not for him, not for the affair, but for myself, for the innocence lost, for the trust shattered, for the woman who had quietly allowed herself to be deceived. By the time the week ended, I felt stronger, more focused. I wasn't healed, not yet, but I was no longer lost. Every step I took, every decision I made, was reclaiming a piece of the life that had been quietly stolen from me. And as I stood in the doorway, watching the evening light spill across the living room, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not let betrayal define me. I would not let deceit dictate the terms of my life. I would rebuild, slowly, deliberately, with care. It all came to a head one Sunday afternoon. I hadn't intended for it to be dramatic. I hadn't planned to reveal anything publicly. But life has a way of forcing your hand, doesn't it? I was at the neighborhood cafe, a quiet place I liked for its old wooden tables and the smell of fresh-baked bread mingling with strong coffee. I was scrolling through messages on my phone when I saw it. A forwarded post from a mutual friend. The photo, the same one that had started this nightmare, was now circulating quietly through our social circle. Comments, half-whispers, polite questions, shocked emojis. People were talking. People knew. I felt the old familiar ache, but also something new, relief. Not vindictive, not joyous, just clarity. The truth could no longer hide in shadows. It was out. By that evening, whispers reached our families. My sister called first, her voice tight. I heard, "I'm so sorry," she said before I could speak. "It's out," I replied simply, "and it's okay. I can handle it." I realized then that betrayal has a peculiar way of isolating you, and yet, when it becomes public, the isolation fades. People may judge, but the truth doesn't hurt anymore. It just exists. The consequence for Tom was quiet but thorough. Friends and colleagues started asking questions, the kind that can't be dodged. Invitations he had taken for granted disappeared. People who had once relied on his charm and smile now looked at him with cautious distance. I didn't celebrate. I never wanted to. This wasn't about seeing him suffer. It was about reclaiming moral balance. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through small, meaningful acts, a missed invitation, a polite but firm exclusion, the subtle recognition that betrayal carries weight, even if society doesn't always acknowledge it loudly. I also noticed the effect on her. She had been trying, I think, to avoid my gaze, to move quietly through our circles. I never sought to humiliate her. I simply refused to allow her presence, to unsettle the life I was slowly rebuilding. And in time, I realized she was just another human, flawed, messy, trying to live in a world that demanded choices she wasn't ready to face. One particularly striking moment came at a family gathering. My mother, always a keen observer, pulled me aside. "You handled it well," she said softly, her hand brushing my arm. "Most people would have exploded. But you held your ground. That's strength." Her words made me realize something essential. Public consequences are not about humiliation. They are about truth shining through, about human beings seeing the results of actions that can no longer hide behind lies. Even within our own family, the ripples were subtle but profound. My siblings, who had once deferred to Tom in decisions, began consulting me. My children, though young, sensed the shift too. The quiet authority I now carried, the way I navigated conversations without fear or defensiveness. And me? I felt a strange calm. The weight of secrecy, the burden of disbelief, was lifting. Life wasn't perfect, it would never be exactly the same, but it was honest. The day I finally returned to the cafe alone, I sat with a notebook, watching people move through the quiet light of late afternoon. I thought about trust, about the invisible threads that connect us to others, and how easily they can fray. I thought about betrayal and how it isolates, but also how confronting it can reclaim power. I realized, too, that the public consequence wasn't just for him, it was for me. Every small act of honesty, every refusal to tolerate deception, was a declaration that I mattered, that my feelings, my life, my dignity were not negotiable. And in that quiet moment, as the sun spilled gold across the wooden tables, I felt a new kind of liberation. The freedom to live in truth, even when it hurts, the ability to move forward, knowing that justice needn't roar. Sometimes it simply whispers. It was months before the house felt like my own again. Not because I hadn't lived here, but because betrayal leaves a residue, subtle, persistent, like dust that clings no matter how often you sweep. I began small. A new set of curtains, sunlight streaming differently through the windows, fresh flowers on the kitchen table, their scent light and insistently alive. A small change, almost imperceptible, yet symbolic, reclaiming the space that had once felt violated. I also started walking every morning, not for exercise, though that helped. I walked to feel the world moving around me, to notice the rhythm of life continuing despite heartbreak, the crunch of gravel beneath my shoes, the chill of dawn on my skin, the smell of wet earth. These became meditative acts, little reminders that life still held beauty even when it had betrayed me. I reconnected with friends I had neglected. Over tea or long evening calls, we shared stories, laughter, and sometimes tears. I realized that healing wasn't a solitary journey. It was woven through relationships, the ones that held you, even when others let go. Work became another anchor. I threw myself into my projects not to escape but to affirm that I was capable, competent, and resilient. My colleagues noticed a shift, quiet confidence, a calm presence even under pressure. I think part of me finally recognized that inner strength doesn't always announce itself. It grows quietly, steady as roots in the soil. I also faced Tom. Not in anger, not in confrontation, but with quiet resolve. When he called, I answered once calmly, letting him speak. I listened to his excuses, his regrets, his attempts at apology. And then I said something I never expected I could say without trembling. I forgive you, not for you, but for me. I need to move forward, and holding on to pain won't let me. He was silent, and I realized forgiveness wasn't a gift to him. It was a release for myself. A door closing gently behind me, letting me step into a new room of life without dragging the past along. The children noticed the change too. They didn't fully understand what had happened. I don't think they needed to, but they noticed that I was calmer, steadier, that I smiled more easily, that our home had warmth again, not the brittle quiet of tension. We baked together, did puzzles, read stories. I felt gratitude in small things, the way my daughter laughed at a clumsy tower of blocks, the way my son leaned against my shoulder while we watched a movie. Those moments were tiny stitches, sewing up the frayed edges of a life once torn. I also began journaling differently, no longer only recording pain and betrayal, but noting hope, small victories, and gratitude. Writing became less a weapon and more a companion, guiding me gently through the process of self-restoration. One entry, written on a rainy afternoon, read, "I am learning that life doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. That strength isn't always loud, that forgiveness is not weakness, that even after the worst storms, sunlight finds its way in." Reading it again, I realized how far I had come, how patient, deliberate healing could be, how pain, when confronted, could become a quiet teacher. I also started helping others quietly. A friend struggling with a difficult spouse, a neighbor coping with loss. I offered my presence, my listening ear. I didn't share the details of my own story unless asked. Instead, I shared the lessons, patience, careful observation, courage, and the understanding that life sometimes demands you to reclaim your own dignity. This, I found, was the deepest kind of healing. When your pain becomes a bridge for others, it stops weighing so heavily on your own shoulders. It transforms. And one evening, as the sun dipped low, casting a warm amber glow across the living room, I finally felt a sense of closure. Not complete, not perfect, but enough. Enough to breathe fully again, to laugh freely, to walk without fear of shadows from the past. I realized that healing is not linear. Some days memories still sting. Some moments bring flashes of anger or sadness. But those days are just that, moments. They do not define the whole of life. Life, I understood, is measured in how we rise after being broken, in how we reclaim trust, rebuild relationships, and hold ourselves with care. And in how, despite betrayal, we choose to live fully, honestly, and with quiet dignity. I often sit by the window now, watching the world go by. Neighbors walking their dogs, children chasing leaves in the wind, the sun spilling gold across the rooftops. Life has returned to its quiet rhythm, a rhythm I once took for granted. And yet, I no longer take it lightly. Betrayal leaves its mark, yes, but it also teaches patience, self-respect, courage, and the power of quiet action. I learned that strength isn't always about confrontation or revenge. Sometimes it's about holding steady, observing carefully, and reclaiming your own life with deliberate grace. I look back and see the path I walked, from confusion to heartbreak, from fear to clarity, from despair to healing, and I see how every small choice mattered, the decision to face the truth, to set boundaries, to forgive for myself, to rebuild slowly. Every act was a stitch in the tapestry of my recovery. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. You cannot control the actions of others, but you can always control your response. You can reclaim your life, piece by piece, moment by moment, and find peace in ways you never imagined. So I leave you with this question. If someone betrayed you, what small step could you take today to reclaim your life? Not out of anger, but out of love for yourself. Thank you for listening. If my story touched you, I invite you to subscribe and share so together we can explore these moments that shape our lives, quietly, courageously, and with heart.